So now I'm going to give just a little thank you thing, and then Alex will introduce you, and then we'll be ready to go. I think we'll get everything started, if that's okay. All right. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. My name is Jeff Bull, and I'd like to welcome you to the keynote session of the 6th Annual Liberal Arts and Sciences Interdisciplinary Conference here at Humber College. Before we begin, thank you. So before we start, it's incumbent on me to make a few little administrative remarks and also offer some big thank yous to people who've helped us bring this about this year. So just a couple of words on things that you might not be clear about or that you should know. Our conference schedule has changed slightly from the time it was put up on our website first to the time that it was printed in the manner you have now. So if you were going by what was on the website, there might be a little difference in when the session is or who's there and so on. So just make sure you have a look at the booklet to make sure of when things are happening if you're going to any of the talks tomorrow. I remind the people who volunteered to be chairs of the different sessions that we generally like to keep the presentations to 20 minutes each and then allow some time for a question and answer, and it can either be questions after each talk or at the end of all three or whatever you want to do, but make sure that the people know that 20 minutes is really all they should be doing. Let me see. I should remind the speakers, therefore, too, that since they are giving talks, they want to make sure they're calm and everything's organized. So if you have any kind of AV matters, make sure you have a little USB key backup in case something goes weird with the H drive. All the rooms have podiums and are all set up, but you never know what might happen. Anyone who's coming to the sessions tomorrow should know you can come a little early if you want, after 9 o'clock, in what I'll call the classic Humber atrium near E135. There's going to be a little breakfast set up there, some coffee, and we'll get ourselves organized, and you'll find a lot of us on the committee there too. So things start properly at 9:45, but we'll be there as of 9. We are on Twitter, so if you tweet, you can be tweeting this event, and tweets are off being tweeted about this event right now at hashtag #BetterWorldHumber. So, I mean, I know nothing about it whatsoever, but if that's something you like to do, good. Thanks to some of our sponsors, who I'll mention in a minute, we are able to provide some free drinks at this reception this evening, but you require a special drink ticket. Anyone who has an official name tag will find one of these drink tickets stuffed in there, and please feel free to use it or to give it to someone else if you want. If you didn't get an official name tag, because we had a little hitch on getting the name tags printed up for you, please know that any kind of name tag gets you a ticket. So come talk to us at the end of the reception and we'll make sure you're set up. People who have proper name tags and didn't make use of this opportunity, we're just going to take their drink tickets and give them to you. So that's all good. So now I'd just like to say thank you to, oh, I think I moved a slide here. Let me go back there. Okay, good. I just want to say some thanks now. I want to say thank you first to Humber's President, Chris Whitaker, and Senior Vice President Academic, Laurie Rancourt, Eileen DeCourcy, VP of Teaching and Learning, the Dean of Research, Patricia Morgan, and the rest of the college administration who've helped us this year and every year to get this event started. It's been really great. I'd like to say in particular thank you too to our Dean of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Paula Gouveia, for always being ready to help us out and letting us spend all her money. To the patient staff in the LAS office, I'd like to put in a good word, especially for Cynthia Wilson, Amanda Phillips, and Arl Viaje, who have seen to many necessary matters, including our website, and done a brilliant job with those. To all the tolerant professional media and facilities staff here at Humber, as well as Antonio and his crew in the Humber room, I want to thank them again for their excellent service. And I want to thank our external sponsors this year, Pearson and Nelson, who provide funds to support faculty research, i.e. drink tickets, and this in the face of the new realities of publishing. And I also want to say personally, thank you to, and on the behalf of the delegates, I should say, thank you to all the members of the LAS Conference Committee this year, Kate Anderson, who's out west, Chris Irwin, Michelle Jordan, Andre Maitenay, Lisa Salem-Wiseman, Alexander Schwartz, Beth Washburn, Mike Wells, all of you for helping us do things and get things organized this year. You've really made it a lot of fun for me to be the chair, and very easy too, so thank you so much. I'd like to turn things now over to Alexander, who's going to come up and introduce our conference keynote speaker, Mr. Greg Rogers.
So it's with great honor that I have the opportunity today to introduce our guest speaker, a very influential figure in Canada who has been instrumental in implementing programs that help to prevent crime and that help individuals who have been involved with the criminal justice system to reintegrate back into society where they can get more education and employment opportunities. Greg Rogers, the Executive Director of the John Howard Society. I met Mr. Rogers for the first time when, as part of the Liberal Studies Film Committee, in collaboration with the City of Toronto's Youth Gang Prevention Project, and Elisa Ferns, the program coordinator at the School of Social and Community Services, we hosted the Interrupters, followed by a panel discussion with experts in criminology. We had experts here from U of T, like Scott Wortley. We had our current Chief of Police here as well, Mark Saunders. We had several experts from all over Canada talking about innovative ways to reduce crime. Greg Rogers has been the Executive Director of John Howard Society since October 2005. He attended the University of New Brunswick and St. Francis Xavier University. He has extensive experience in Aboriginal economic development, adult education, and media relations. Prior to moving to Toronto, Mr. Rogers worked in Alberta, Nunavut, and Ottawa. He was instrumental in catalyzing, currently, the merger between the John Howard Society and St. Leonard's Society of Toronto, so that it now stands as one of the largest local providers of community correctional services and programs. The John Howard Society has a mandate of prevention, intervention, and reintegration, making our community safer by supporting the rehabilitation and reintegration of those who have been in conflict with the law. It is dedicated to helping all people who have been in conflict with the law and individuals at imminent risk of coming into conflict with the law through service, education, and community programs. It operates many innovative programs, including the nationally recognized post-incarceration housing support program, diversion court alternatives at the Jane and Finch and North York courthouses, and the transitional housing program for Toronto Drug Court. It has its main office on Eglinton West with branch offices in Scarborough, downtown, and the new Reintegration Center in South Etobicoke. I encourage all of you to find out more about the John Howard Society on their website. So in today's keynote address, Greg Rogers will be talking about getting smart on crime, which of course relates to our LAS conference on a better world.
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a real honor to be here. And for about the last 4 years, I've actually sat on Humber College's advisory panel for Beverly Jean Daniels' program down at the South Campus. So we are Humber. I also think a better world is something we should all strive for, and I hope we pull it off in the next couple days, even if it's only in baby steps. I thought I'd start off and give a story on perception. A few years ago, I got a phone call from Foreign Affairs Canada. My equivalent, who was running the equivalent of John Howard in Venezuela, was visiting Toronto, and he wanted to meet with me. And he didn't speak any English, and my Spanish consists of dos cerveza, por favor. So the guy from Foreign Affairs came, and we met. And so the guy from Venezuela looks at me and he says, "What's the biggest problem you have with the criminal justice system here in jails and prisons in Canada?" And I said, "Recidivism. The guys getting out, trying to find something for them to do to keep them out of jail." Then I looked at him and I said, "What's the biggest problem you have in Venezuela?" He says, "Hand grenades." And I, pardon me? And he said, "Well, they have gangs in prison in Venezuela, and they stockpile arms, and they have a problem with hand grenades in jail." And I thought, well, you win. And I thought that sort of put it in perspective in terms of the way we look at things and making the world a better place. How we're going to spend the next hour? Well, first of all, I'm going to tell you a poignant story, which will talk about the complexity of crime. And I mean, crime we can talk for weeks on, and we have an election and we're about to sort it all out. I'm going to give an overview of the John Howard Society. I'm going to go through some of the problems facing our criminal justice system, 5 things we must change, some real solutions. And by real solutions, I'm not a criminologist. I'm not a social worker. I'm the lead of a frontline agency that does frontline work And I'm going to suggest some real solutions. I'm going to give a primer on the election, and then we're going to chat together, and then we're going to move forward and create a better world. I'd been at John Howard about 2 years, and I got a phone call from the Toronto Police Force. There was a guy getting out of jail, a dangerous sexual offender, and could John Howard help house him? And Toronto Police Force phones us, I don't know, half dozen times a year where these guys are coming out. Now, this guy was really bad. He had committed a series of rapes. He was a serial rapist. He'd gone to jail. He'd got out on parole after, I think it was 7 or 8 years. He'd committed another series of rapes, and he was rearrested, of course, went back in, served 20 years, served the full extent of his term, and was now released, and was being released back into the community. Was also, coincidentally, on the front cover of the Toronto Sun that day. So they bring this guy in, and I thought I better meet with him because this is pretty dangerous stuff. And you know, there's community safety involved, and we better make sure we do this right. Well, about 2 minutes into meeting this guy, I don't know what his IQ was, but it was like a 10-year-old. And not a bright 10-year-old. He certainly developmentally delayed. He didn't know right from wrong. It was pathetic. I'm not a clinician, but I would bet money on fetal alcohol, and I suspect that this man's life was doomed, as were his victims, before he came out of the womb. That's what we were dealing with. And then I thought in a bigger picture, what are we supposed to do with people like this? First of all, we have an obligation that the community is safe. We also, whether you agree with it or not, this guy had completed his debt to society that the judge had given him. How do we fit him back in the community? And that was when I realized the complexity of the criminal justice system and the challenges we face. It's not as cut and dry as they'll have you believe in the media, where we get tough on crime. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some facts. I'm going to give some stuff based on experience, and some of which will just be opinions. And I hope you'll be able to tell which are which. The John Howard Society was established in 1929 by the Toronto Police Chief, Colonel Draper, and it was to help guys getting out of the old Don jail. We have 65 offices coast to coast to coast. We're in 10 provinces and 2 territories. We're not in the Yukon. Not my fault. I don't know why. Basically, if there's a prison in your community, there's probably a John Howard. We have our national office in Kingston. And a friend of mine works at the National Film Board, and they found a movie called Raw Material. They gave it to me about 5 years ago. And it's a story of a guy being released from prison in 1955. And I'm telling you, except for the use of the word swell and fedora hats, nothing has changed. Like nothing. He still faces the stigma. He still faces the challenge of staying straight. He still faces the challenge of the peers that he are trying to drag him back down. And I'd love to show it to you, but it's 25 minutes and we just don't have that. Anyway, I'm going to go through the 3 things that, I've got to remember to use this, the 3 types of programs that John Howard does. In the opening it was mentioned we've just amalgamated with the St. Leonard Society. The reason we did that is, first of all, it's a very challenging time to be in the nonprofit sector in Toronto, in Canada, anywhere. I always said that John Howard put the non in nonprofit. And government wants to deal with bigger agencies that can handle cash flow, that have the administrative supports. So, you know, basically we took over St. Leonard's, and we now have a budget of about $4.2 million a year. We have 63 full-time staff. We have 6 offices in all areas, sectors of Toronto, including down in South Etobicoke, where we work quite closely with Humber down there. There are separate John Howard affiliates in York region, in Peel, Halton, Dufferin, and in Durham region. There are different affiliates. Certainly I'm in contact with them, but if you're mad at them, it's not my fault. The three types of programs we do are alternatives to prison, Inreach to prison, and post-release supports. I've identified three special programs that are alternatives to prison that we deliver. Justice on Target, or what used to be called diversion, is for first-time offenders of a non-violent crime. Shoplifting, theft under $10,000, vandalism, that sort of thing. And we delivered at two of the courts here in Toronto, up at North York and up at Jane and Finch. I've had the opportunity to sit in on this program a number of times. I'll tell you a story that'll mortify you. One of the clients brought in that we were to help was a 70-year-old Italian guy who stole a tomato. Now, I don't know what the costs involved were in arresting him, processing him, dragging him through the criminal justice system, a judge, crown attorney, but they were more than the cost of a tomato. And that struck me as pretty silly. However, I've also seen the other side of the coin. What our workers do is we provide we give sanctions to the people that are charged with these crimes. And it may be you apologize. It may be you pay retribution. It may be that you donate money to a charity, or it may be you do community service. And I'll never forget the day there was a Russian couple who had just moved here to Canada, didn't speak a word of English. They had a translator in the court with them. And they had stolen $500 worth of children's clothing from a department store. And the reason they had done it is it was September. Their children were going to school and they had nothing to wear. And they had no money and they didn't know where to get money. So what we did is we gave them each, the man and the woman, 25 hours of community service with the Russian Community Center up in North York so that they could meet supports, so that they could access things to help them. The province of Ontario tell us that the Justice on Target program has a 95% success rate. That is that 95% of the people that go through it are never seen in the court system again. And the great thing is they don't get a criminal record if they complete the sanction. And we'll talk a lot about criminal records in a minute. Toronto Drug Court, we provide transitional housing for, this is for people who are arrested on drug crimes. And they have their choice, if they're eligible, of either going to jail or to going to through drug court. And drug court involves random urine analysis, so we know if you're using, and it involves weekly counseling with CAMH, both group and individual. Most of the guys that go through it are crack, growing crystal meth. It's probably easier to go to jail than it is to beat a crack habit. So these people have made a commitment that they want to move on. When we started the program had a 14.7% success rate of the people who were going through the homeless people going through the program. That's who we work with. It's now 62%. Now, that's not rocket science. You can help a person a lot better if they're in housing as compared to on the corner of Yonge and Dundas. And that's all we do. We provide a safe place for them to live. We provide supports. And voila, these people are beating their habit, moving on, and not going to jail. The third type of program is we do the PAR program, which is if you're convicted of a domestic, you take court-mandated 12-week course. The thing that I like about the program is we have workers whose sole job it is to work with the partner to make sure the partner's safe. We're in contact to make sure that the guy is meeting the conditions of his release and that she is safe. Okay, the second type of program we do is we do Inreach to prisons. In Toronto, there's two main detention centers. There's the Toronto South and the Toronto East. The Toronto South opened in February 2014. It's had a graduated opening and just about every problem in the book. It's only about half full now, but eventually it will be 1,625 individuals, second biggest prison in Canada behind Edmonton, and it will be releasing 200 people a week into the community. The Toronto East is out in Scarborough. Right now I think there's about 550 individuals in it. Where you provide Aboriginal services. We provide the HIP program, which is for black inmates. A lot of effort is put into post-release planning. Freeing the Human Spirit, we not only deliver in Toronto, we deliver it across the country. and that is yoga and meditation for inmates. Now, I'm not a yoga person, and when they came to us and said, would you deliver this, I thought, no, I prefer programs that lead to something tangible like housing, employment, and so forth. I was wrong. This program has been tremendous wherever it's been delivered. First of all, the inmate himself and herself, because it's delivered at female prisons as well, usually doesn't have a lot of tools in their toolbox when it comes to dealing with frustration or anger. Meditation is giving them an ability, an alternative to violence. The guards love it because a mellow inmate beats an angry inmate, and the wardens love it because the guards are happy. So it's a win-win-win. And what has been surprising to me is the amount of people that upon release want to continue doing it. And we've actually had to, in Toronto, we partners with PASAN, which is Prisoners with AIDS Network, to deliver a post-release, because the guys don't have any money on release. They can't go out and take hot yoga somewhere or something. So we're able to deliver that for them down at Queen and Parliament area. We provide liaison with the Reintegration Centre. I'll talk more about that in a sec. And we have volunteers go in. Now, I'm going to tell you a story about the danger of taking government money. When you take government money, you can't take it with one hand and then jump up and down and complain about the government on the other. That's, first of all, it's not fair. Second of all, you get yourself in a whole pile of trouble if you do that. Conversely, you can't help people if you don't have staff, and you can't have staff if you don't get government funding. So John Howard does take government funding. And about 3 years ago, I got a phone call from the Toronto Star. And they were doing an article. There was a problem with the people that push the carts around the prisons, giving books to the library service to the inmates. It wasn't existing anymore. And interestingly, I'd read a few days before that in Brazil, they were giving you, for inmates, for every book they read, they gave them a day off their sentence, which I thought was wonderful. And especially here in Canada, as we will talk here in a sec, you know, it's people with low literacy rates going to jail, so reading is a good thing. So my quote, controversial as it may sound, that went in the Toronto Star was, reading is a good thing. Honest to God. Did I get in heck for that? My staff got in heck. You know, I really caution people to, you know, not to push the pocket that far. Anyway, post-release programs. I'll talk about the Toronto Reintegration Centre last. We did a study in 2006 that showed that 1 out of 3 people leaving prison in Toronto was homeless upon release. And coincidentally, the City of Toronto did their first street needs assessment in 2006, and they found that 20% of the people in the streets and shelters of Toronto had got there directly from the criminal justice system. By the way, in the 2 subsequent street needs assessment, that figure has stayed true, 20%. So we created post-incarceration housing supports, where, I mean, one of the problems we have is Johnny gets out Tuesday at 2 o'clock. He's not going to have housing by supper time. It just doesn't work like that. So he's going into the shelter system. Now, I'm a former shelter operator in a previous life. The shelter system is good for what it is. However, it does not monitor sanctions that a client may have, that a guy leaving prison may have. He may be no alcohol, no drugs. He may have a curfew, that sort of thing. The shelter system was never designed to monitor that sort of thing. Also, many of the shelters in Toronto are where you get crack. So if your problem is crack, you know, I always say if they're out by 2, and they're in a shelter, they're doing crack by 3. This does not help lower recidivism. So, you know, we're a big believer that we've got to get the guys housed as fast as possible. So we started this program in 2006. We've housed over 650 men. We're now housing about 10 men a month, and the retention rate of people keeping their housing is about 75%, which means 75% of that 650 plus guys have not gone back to prison. So that's a good thing. One of the big problems we have with housing is these guys don't have a job when they're released. They have a criminal record. It'll be that much harder for them to get a job. You'll learn that they have addictions issues, mental health issues, low literacy. These are not dream employees for the most part. They have a lot of challenges. So what we do, and my staff do daily, is I take 20-year-olds down and I put them on welfare, on Ontario Works. Now, how pathetic is that? I'm from New Brunswick. I know what multi-generational welfare looks like, but it's the only money we can get these guys. And I mean, I don't even know what that does for their well-being and their belief in themselves. It's $608 a month, I believe, right now, OW. I don't know how you live in Toronto on $608 a month. I wouldn't want to try it. And that's everything. That's food, that's shelter, that's whatever. At John Howard, we considered it a success if we can get a guy on disability, because then he gets $950 a month. He can get better bed housing. So anyway, one of the keys is employment programs. We run 2 employment programs for the City of Toronto for people with a criminal record. And it's basically working with guys, telling them what they're going to run into, getting them ready, and finding them placement. We also created 2 social enterprises, one St. Leonard's had created and one we created. The one at John Howard is great. We train the clients on asbestos abatement and demolition. And our guys are great with sledgehammers. And then we place them with demolition agencies here in Toronto. And did you know that just about every building built before 1960 has asbestos in it? And I learned the hard way when we bought our new building in Eglinton West, and $125,000 later that it had asbestos. We run anger management programs. Toronto is full of angry people. I came in the TTC today, I understand. We run addictions programs. We're harm reduction based. I believe very much in 12-step programs. They're great, but they're not for everyone. Many people fail as they try to break their addiction. Addiction is a tough thing. So we're harm reduction based. We do relapse prevention programs. We're big believers you can't help somebody if they're dead. So let's keep them alive and work at dealing with the challenges as we move along. We operate a halfway house, a reporting center, and a reporting center is for people who are released into the community so that they check in and we know how they're doing. We run record suspension programs, so I'll talk more about that later. And we opened the Toronto Reintegration Center in November 2014. In about 2005, 2006, we heard they were going to close the old Dawn Jail. We had a party, this was good. And then they were opening this new super jail down in South Etobicoke. Now the problem with South Etobicoke is there are very few community services there, social services. And what there are great parks in the summer, which if you're going to be homeless, South Etobicoke is a good place for it. That both the Queensway and Lakeshore have bars and massage parlors that as you're leaving prison, these can be of interest. And this was a concern to a number of people, including the police, Humber College, the politicians, and the social service providers. So what we developed between the bunch of us was a reintegration center where we would use the United Way model of a hub and move a bunch of social service agencies under one roof. And so when Johnny got out of prison, he just crossed the street and we could help him. Now, we opened a building that is god-awful. I mean, this building it's just terrible. However, it is right across the street, and there's a lot of research that says you have an hour to reach these guys as they leave prison. So it was very important for us to be as close as possible. Now, sometimes Johnny just needs, he was arrested in July, it's February, he needs a winter coat. That's easy. Sometimes he needs to get into the mental health system, detox, that sort of thing. That's far more complicated. We have some wonderful agencies that work there, including Coda Health and Margaret's. We have the African Canadian Legal Clinic. And the goal of the Reintegration Center was to lower recidivism. And to that end, we've now got some funding to do some research to see how do we compare to the general population. And who we needed to support this was Ministry of the Attorney General, because we know who's come into the Reintegration Center. We know where we sent them. We know if they got there. We know if it's easy enough to find out if they got there for a follow-up meeting. What we didn't know is, did they reoffend? And this is where the Ministry of the Attorney General wants to help us out. Because if we can lower recidivism by 20% or whatever, it's a great idea. If we lower it by 1%, then boy, did we waste a lot of time and effort and thought. Because we just think we know what we're doing with that. We'd like to prove we know what we're doing. Something we did do is we installed a peer support program. Most of the workers at the Reintegration Center have been to jail. They carry a credibility with the inmates that I never will, because they've been there. They also know what the guys are experiencing as they are released. Some of the services we offer is we'll escort you to where we refer you to, because in South Etobicoke, if we're sending you to the Scarborough Housing Help, there's a lot of distractions along the way. And there's a chance Johnny might not make it to Scarborough Housing Help. However, if we escort him, we'll get him there, he accesses services, he gets into housing. Like I say, the proof will be in the pudding. We'll know down the road, did we lower recidivism? Basically, we're helping clients move from this to this. Okay. Canadian Prisons 101. Basically, there are two systems. There's the federal and the provincial. The federal is 2 years or more. The provincial system is 2 years less a day or less. There are two basic types of prisons in the provincial system. There's detention centers, which is for people who are in remand, that is awaiting trial. And there are correctional centers for the people who are doing 2 years less a day and on convictions. Right now, 63% of the people in prison in Ontario are on remand. That is waiting trial. They're often there, and in fact, I believe the average is somewhere around 34 days. And in 34 days, you can lose your job. In 34 days, you can lose your housing. And in 34 days, you can lose your support of your family because of disgrace and so forth. There's very limited programming while you're on remand. There's many court appearances, and it's not all the province's fault. The lawyers play games with this like you wouldn't believe. And it's basically because Johnny's in jail, he's getting credit for time served, so they don't show up for court appearances or they cancel at the last minute. Meanwhile, Johnny's going back and forth. And you know, the bottom line is all the remand facilities are maximum security because we don't know how dangerous these guys are until they go through their court proceedings. So I can't imagine what it's like as a 19-year-old who went out on a bender and did something stupid, which you know most 19-year-old guys are capable of, woke up in jail. I'd be terrified. I really would be terrified. And I would be terrified. I'll just leave it at that. Okay, who's going to jail? There's an overrepresentation of minorities and marginalized people. There's a disproportionate representation of Aboriginal people. 1 in 5 people in jail in Canada is Aboriginal, yet they're 4% of the population, if that. 1 in 3 women in jail in Canada is Aboriginal. Most common offenses are property related, often connected to drug-seeking behaviors, stealing stuff so you have money to buy drugs. Many have already been institutionalized either in the youth system or they've already been to jail. 30 to 40% have mental health issues. What we're seeing is an aging of who's coming out of jail and who's actually in jail. I'll tell you a story. 3 or 4 years ago, I got a phone call from a guy who just got out of Kingston after 30 years, and he was about 55 years of age. He'd originally gone in for armed robbery. He tried to tunnel out 3 times and got caught all 3 times. So anyhow, he spent 30 years. And he phoned me and he said, "Greg, look, I'll do anything. I can't go back in. Help me." Well, my first thought was the TTC was busy doing subways at the time. His tunneling experience might have worked. However, what we did is we got him into under-the-table work with a moving company, and you know that's too bad because he's not getting health. He's not getting health supports. He's not getting workman's comp. He's not getting paid days off. He's not getting sick leave. However, he is getting paid. And he phoned me about, I don't know, a year ago, and he said, Greg, things are still going great. I'm still out. I'm still working. I've got a room in a rooming house. And, you know, I was very pleased. Here's one that breaks my heart. 20% of federal prisoners have below grade 8 education, 50% below grade 10, and only 22% of those in the federal system have a high school diploma. 7 out of 10 prisoners admit a substance abuse program, a substance abuse problem, and who's going to jail in Toronto are coming from the 13 poorest neighborhoods. It's the 13 neighborhoods at risk and homeless folks downtown that are going to jail. The bridle path is doing okay. So that's who's going to jail. This next slide I just stole from Maclean's magazine. And, you know, it's, many Canadians will say, oh, those Americans and what they've done with their black population, where a black man is more likely to go to jail than he is to go to college or university. Well, we're not doing so good either. And I really would ask you, as you work towards a better place, let's not forget our Aboriginal folks. My wife is Inuit. I've seen firsthand the destruction in Nunavut. It's number one in everything. Homicides, suicides, violent crime, domestic abuse. These people are dying younger than we are. The difference in her life and her family and me, white bread from Fredericton, New Brunswick, is night and day. And it is a disgrace. Here's a comparison of offenders admitted to the federal system. 47.8% of Aboriginal offenders were under the age of 30, compared to 38.1% of non-Aboriginal offenders. Median age for Aboriginal offenders is 30, for non-Aboriginal 33. There's the age offender overall, the federal system, and frankly, I don't have access to the provincial system, but I would suspect it's very close. What you see is that young men go to jail. And that's the same in every country and every culture in the world. Young men do stupid things. Young men go to jail. In Canada, it's about 11 men for every woman that goes to jail. Having said that, I doubt you'd find a John Howard staff person who would go to E-Fry, because the challenges facing women that are incarcerated are immense, because you lock up a woman, you're locking up a family. Okay. There's the breakdown nationally of ethnicity, of who's going to jail. In Toronto, it's certainly different. This is Toronto. About 50% of the people in jail in Toronto would be of color. Something that, this is anecdotally, you show me a group that has moved to Canada, and 5 years later I'll show you an increase of that population in prison. We've certainly seen it with the Somalian population. We're seeing it now with the Central and South American, Latin American population, big increase in Spanish speakers. We're seeing a big increase in people from the old former Eastern Bloc countries because of the big immigration waves. It's poverty that causes it. It's not ethnicity, it's poverty. What's it like in jail? Look, you've all watched this. I'll tell you an interesting story. I hired a woman who just got out after 8 years in the women's system here in Canada. And I said to her, is it like orange is the new black? And she said, you know, I was keen. And she said, no, that's the American system. In Canada, they would never let that many women interact with each other, which I found fascinating. So, and she says she won't watch it. The one item I'd like to point out here is crime school. You know, who's in jail? Well, there's a lot of criminals in jail. And if you want to make contacts into the criminal world and post-release you want some other opportunities, that's where you'll meet these folks. Problems, we have a few. Prison. John Howard was a prison reformer in England in the late 1700s. Before that, prisons in England were debtors' prisons. You've all seen Dickensy movies with the hands out. Basically, you got to eat if you gave money to your jailer and or your family came and gave you food. John Howard believed that prison should be punishment and rehabilitation. That is, you go to prison to feel badly and reflect upon what you've done and to rehabilitate so that when you come out, you can re-enter society. In Canada, we're doing punishment great. We're doing a really bad job at rehabilitation. And where that's scary is that 95% of the people who go to jail are coming out. And they're going to move next door to you, and they're going to move next door to me. Well, I hope the one that moves next door to me has had some rehabilitation programs. Large remand numbers, we've talked about that. Lockdowns, dead time. Dead time is when you're on remand and you're not taking any programming. You're just sitting in there. The system is broken. We'll talk more about Hep C, HIV later. Crime school we've talked about. Post-release, the recidivism. Institutionalization. I've met guys that have been in jail so long that they can't choose between Coke and Pepsi because they haven't had to make a choice in so long. I don't know if you've all seen, many of you would have seen Shawshank Redemption, the guy who killed himself because he just couldn't handle it outside. I certainly know of guys that have reoffended to go back in because that's where their buddies were. That's where they felt comfortable. That's where they felt safe. I want to talk about criminal record, Bill 168. About 3 or 4 years ago, the province of Ontario introduced Bill 168, which is the violence in the workplace law, which is a good law. Nobody wants violence in the workplace. However, one of the repercussions is that myself at John Howard, the dean of Humber College, the hiring manager at McDonald's, when we hire somebody, if we hire somebody and they had a criminal record and they did a violent criminal record and they did a violent act at work, not only can John Howard or Humber College or McDonald's be sued, I can be sued. The dean of Humber College can be sued. The hiring manager at McDonald's can be sued. And the reason, so how do we get around that? We ask for criminal record checks so we know who we're hiring. The problem that's facing, that our guys are running into, is most hiring managers don't know the difference between an axe murderer and a drug charge in 1993. And a drug charge in 1993 was not a violent crime. So hence, Johnny and Billy apply for jobs. Johnny's got a criminal record, Billy doesn't. Billy's getting the job. And it's hard enough with young people, as you guys all well know, finding employment. Add a criminal record into that, and we're sentencing these people to a lifetime of being a ward of the state, you know? I wanted to tell you a quick penny wise, pound foolish story. You may remember, it was in the news 3 or 4 years ago, that aghast, we were paying tier 2 of cable in Ontario prisons for prisoners. They were getting the second level of cable. Oh my God. This was costing the Ontario taxpayer about $50,000. Now the reason that tier 2 was in there was because on tier 2 is black entertainment television. And the people who are in jail are black. So they wanted black entertainment television. And the guards used it as a carrot. That you're good today, you can have black entertainment television. It was very popular. But of course, once the taxpayer found out that, oh my God, we're doing this, they had to get rid of it. So what this resulted in is a whole bunch of violence in the prison because the guards had lost a carrot, a way to keep people under control. So they had to hire a bunch more guards, which is good at Humber because you're graduating people. But I doubt very much you can hire one guard for $50,000, including salary and benefits. So these are the things that we run into, and I'm only 28. Look what it's doing to my hair, you know? Okay. Crime rate is falling while our incarceration rate increases. No, they're not related. Any criminologist I've ever met will tell you that they're not related, that crime is falling and we're still incarcerating more people. In 2011-2012, there's an average of 39,241 inmates, 21% are 24 years of age or younger. 54.2%, I love this, of all custodial sentences, sentenced to jail imposed by the courts are less than 1 month. Why are we paying all this money if a person only needs less than 1 month in jail? What is that actually accomplishing? And of all the convictions that result in custody, only 4% result in sentences of 2 years or more. Lock people up if you're scared of them, not just because you're mad at them. Okay, what is the cost of incarceration? Well, it's steep. There's the 2012 figures. I guarantee you the 2015 figures are higher. The bottom one, by the way, is the cost of having somebody in the community as compared to somebody in jail. Here's how they've been growing. Now, in this day and age, a politician cannot get elected by saying, I'm going to increase your taxes. You may be able to get elected if you increase the deficit, but you can't raise taxes unless it's on the top 1% or something. And healthcare costs are going to go up as people like me get older. So we have to look for efficiencies, to quote Rob Ford, or savings in the system. And I would suggest to you that stop being stupid on crime would be a good place to start. That difference of 35,000 and 100 and whatever thousand per head is quite significant. You have an obligation, we'll talk about this very shortly, about making sure that the right people are going to prison. There is a place for, I believe in prison, John Howard believes in prison. However, there are alternatives that in many cases would be more cost effective. Okay, 5 things we could do to improve the system, and I'm going to go through these fairly fast. It's easy to identify problems. Coming up with solutions takes a bit more work. The rate at which inmates are sent to prison easily is eclipsing the rate at which federal and provincial authorities spend money on support services for those inmates. The result is an overcrowded prison system whose population is at heightened risk to reoffend. Canada is experiencing a crisis in bail and remand. Far too many prisoners, more than 50% in our provincial and territorial jails, have not been convicted or sentenced. Though it costs about $185 per day to keep a person in custody, the conditions of confinement in provincial and territorial remand facilities are some of the worst in the entire correctional system. They're crowded, they're violent, they're lacking in essential services and programs. The presumption of innocence is also undermined by police record checks revealing non-conviction information about individuals that is damaging. I want to quote something from the United Nations minimum standard rules for the treatment of prisoners. Where sleeping accommodation is in an individual cell or room, each prisoner shall occupy by night a cell or a room by himself. If for special reasons such as temporary overcrowding, it becomes necessary for the Central Prison Administration to make an exception to this rule, it is not desirable to have 2 prisoners in a cell or room. We just opened a brand new prison that's built to have 2 people in each room. 2 years ago in Toronto, the Don Jail had 3 people in a room. The 3rd person was sleeping on the floor with his head next to the toilet. That's the truth. That was happening in your city 2 years ago. Okay, sue for peace in the war on drugs. Well, guess what? It's over. It was lost. You have, what's his name, Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders agreeing on this. Now, for very different reasons, but the costs and what it has done to society in America and in Canada has been incredible. An element of the war on drugs was that tough penalties would reduce drug use. Evidence suggests this did not happen. Our prisons are filled with people battling addictions, with improving knowledge, evidence of effective approaches, and an understanding that addictions is an illness. There are better and more effective ways to deal with addicts. Virtually every drug addict is dealing with some other issue: mental illness, violence in the home, effects of colonialism, or just pressures of a job. Instead of demonizing users, we should start by trying to deal with those issues. Okay. treat rather than punish the mentally ill. Now, you could do a 5-hour session on mental illness as it relates to the criminal justice system. An increasing number of prisoners battling mental illness and suffering from brain injuries is a cause of concern for all sectors of the criminal justice and corrections system. Imprisonment, particularly solitary confinement, is known to worsen mental health, leading to self-harm and suicide. Effective justice and humane approaches are needed. The John Howard Society of Ontario recently released a study called Unlocking Change, and I'll get to that in just a sec. About, 6 years ago, a lot of money came into Ontario to deal with criminal justice, mental health, and in the criminal justice system. And I'll talk about a consequence of this, but I was at a conference, and the agency that got this, and it was about $7 or $8 million a year, was coming into Toronto alone for mental health and justice. And I'm at a conference where the guy who's head of this agency, and he's a good guy, and I have total respect, he's speaking. Somebody puts their hand up and says, he's going on, he's explaining the program, and he says, we won't deal with violent offenders. So somebody puts their hand up and says, well, what do you do with violent offenders? And he goes, we send those to John Howard. So I'm thinking, okay, you get $7 million in the easy guys, and I get nothing in the hard guys. Who's the idiot here? Anyway, that's not the only time I've ever thought that. What happened because of this investment in the criminal justice system is that it's now where people with mental illness are coming across. Adults, this is where the intersection point is now the criminal justice system, where we used to have programs like Thousand Queen, which was awful. These people came out and we didn't invest in the supports for them. So what happened is they became the homeless. They became the prisoners. So we are now paying $189 a day to keep them locked up in prison because we don't know what else to do with them. And the costs are astronomical. Here are the recommendations that John Howard Ontario made. Pretty straightforward stuff. You can read them. Foster effective and humane corrections, support successful reentry and reintegration, destigmatize mental health, police records, and past justice involvement. Which something it does touch on here is the social determinants of health. And I have just put a little bit about it in because I think it's a good way to judge our criminal justice system and who's going there and who's coming out. And this is by WHO. The social determinants of health are the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work, and age, including the health system. These circumstances are shaped by the distribution of money, power, and resources at global, national, and local levels, which are themselves influenced by policy choices. The social determinants of health are mostly responsible for health inequities, the unfair and avoidable differences in health status seen within and between countries. And here are the 9 determinants of social determinants of health from the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm sure to those of you involved in social services, there's no big surprises there. And kudos to Humber University. You're training tomorrow's experts who are going to work on those things. Social determinants of health versus prisons. Something to keep in mind about a prison is it's a confined community of deprivation. There's increased mortality, there's suicide, overdose, ill health, untreated diseases. You know that it has tuberculosis in Canada's prisons. It increases existing health and mental health conditions. We have mass incarceration of certain groups. More than 95% of these people are coming back into the community, and we have a concentration of unhealthy people all in the same place. Something this slide and the next slide talk about is the increase of HIV, AIDS, and Hep C in the prisons. In Spain, not a particularly liberal country or a progressive country, they did a lot of research, and they found that they were paying a fortune for HIV and AIDS and Hep C, because the guys were getting it in prison, and like Canada, 95% of them were coming out, and it turns out they weren't celibate upon release. So the Spanish government invested a lot of money into harm reduction, into making sure there were condoms everywhere, but also into training and educating the prisoners about safe sex, about tattooing, about sharing needles. And what did they see? Well, HIV, AIDS, Hep C rates in the prisons went down, and they went down in the general population too. So the money, which would not have been huge to buy condoms and provide training, saved the system at the other end a fortune. I'm sad to tell you that in Canada, about 3 or 4 years ago, we actually stopped our tattoo program. We had a safe tattoo program in prison. And anybody who's ever met a prisoner knows they probably have a tattoo, and a lot of them get their tattoos, tacky as they may well be, in prison. And they get them by sharing the needles that they're doing this with. So we had a safe tattoo program, but we got rid of it. Here we go. In Canada, the Hep C is 20% higher in prison than in the general population, and it's 17 to 21% provincially and 30 to 40% federally, and it varies from one region to the other, and it costs the taxpayer a fortune. It also, I think, has a huge social cost. Interventions, and I'm just going to skip through this, that a needle exchange, like they have in many countries in Europe, condoms, dental dam distribution. Right now they're allowed 2 condoms each in Canada. Do you know in America, and this is a great one, they wouldn't give the guys condoms because sex in prison was illegal, so if they gave condoms, they were encouraging illegal activity. That didn't work so well. Once again, more interventions. The Safe Tattoo program I talked about. The need for comprehensive programs to address HIV in prison, the need for universal health care access in prison, need for adequate resources, and to me this is a big one. You have a captive audience. We can educate, address, and treat these people while they're in there. As I mentioned, a lot of these folks come with low education, low background. They haven't spent a lot of time at Humber College. It's a wonderful opportunity when they're in there to educate them. Heck, you know, I mean, I tried to say reading is good and got in trouble. These are the challenges that the system faces. And yes, prison health is public health. Proportionate and constructive penalties. A growing number of mandatory minimum, custodial, and financial penalties have constrained judicial discretion and resulted in sentences that are disproportionately harsh. The BC Civil Liberties Association concludes in its report on mandatory minimum sentencing the need for evidence-based, thoughtful police reform in the criminal justice system cannot be clearer, but we cannot wait. Lawyers, advocacy organizations, researchers, and policymakers all have important and immediate roles to play in preventing the unjustness that will result from mandatory minimum sentences, and we need ongoing research on the downstream costs of incarceration. We need to increase public education about the criminal justice system. The general public knows very little about sentencing. It is our responsibility to ensure that the justice system is first and foremost just. Okay, humane conditions. Okay. The increasing number of prisoners in the federal and provincial correctional facilities have made it difficult for correctional authorities to meet the essential needs of prisoners and provide rehabilitative programs. Many prisons have become crowded and violent without opportunities for skills development and constructive activity. Prisoners are facing long periods of incarceration, less support, and less supervision through parole. This approach makes communities less safe. We need a safer and more effective approach. I've just got this up briefly. This is John Howard's resolution regarding solitary confinement, and it's aligned with the United Nations Committee Against Torture. Okay. Oh, well, here I skipped a slide, and I know you don't want me to do that. Okay. Key indicators that show that Correctional Service Canada is facing challenges. Over the past 5 years, parole grant rates have declined by 20%. We're keeping people in longer. The proportion of sentence served incarceration prior to first release is the highest since 2003. 71% of all releases are statutory releases. Now, a statutory release is you're sentenced to 20 years, you're going to be in there for 20 years. So you come out at that. Here's the danger in that. If I've served my 20 years, I walk out the door, I've paid my debt to society, you've got no call over me. If you release me at 14 years or 15 years or whatever, I have to report to my parole officer. I have to meet the conditions of my release. Or I can be breached and I go back. Something that, CSC spends less than 5% of its budget on correctional reintegration programs, yet, like I say, 95% of people are coming out. Okay, we know there's a connection between incarceration, homelessness, and addictions. There has been widespread interest in the research and usefulness as an impetus for change. I bring this up, and I've got a number of issues there in research because of the audience I'm talking to. John Howard has undertaken John Howard Toronto has undertaken 3 extensive research projects, the third of which we hired economist John Stapleton, who showed that for everybody you can pull out of the criminal justice system, that cycle, the savings to the taxpayer is $352,000. And we feel that's conservative. That's just based on policing, court costs, incarceration costs. Janine has actually helped John Howard on research before, where we looked at the effects of this new jail opening in South Etobicoke. Certainly, I would beseech those of you who are involved with research to pick a subject and to investigate it. Our criminal justice system is broken. First person that shows up with a good idea wins. Okay, some real solutions. Okay, first of all, we can never forget community safety. As much as I may have gone on with the challenges or the problems facing the system, we have an obligation to make sure that I'm safe, my kids are safe, your kids are safe, so forth. At John Howard, we will breach people. And we do that because of an obligation to keep the community safe. And I have had an amazing number of the guys we breach either phone me or write me and say thank you because it was going to get worse, because they're spiraling. And they know it. Crime has 5 letters, not 4. My God, the stuff that's in the newspapers about crime, I mean, if it bleeds, it leads. You know, you would think Toronto, you know, everybody's getting murdered. I know my mother did. You know, she would sit in Fredericton, New Brunswick and listen about Toronto and about the murders, and she thought I was living in Beirut or something. It's, you know, first of all, the crime rate is going down. The violent crime rate is going down. We can't keep letting the media and the politicians scare us just to get themselves elected. And I'm not picking on any one party, because all 3 major parties have come out as tough on crime, because if they didn't, they'd lose the vote in Mississauga. America the Brave. In Texas, they'll fry your grandmother. In Michigan is not a particularly progressive state, yet in Texas, they have alternatives to prison that would make a Canadian drool. Michigan, they just got rid of mandatory minimums. Why? Not some noble reason. Money. They couldn't afford to keep the criminal justice system going the way they had in the States. It is my belief, and we'll see if I'm right, that after this election, all of a sudden in Canada, we'll start getting smart on crime. Not because we're particularly noble, but because we can't afford to keep locking everybody up. And not just locking them up, letting 95% of them out and putting them on welfare and subsidizing them, and then rearresting them and taking them to court and putting them back in jail. The costs are incredible. We need nimble. The world has changed a lot in the last 20 years, the last 10 years. You as educators, I'm sure you see the changes in students from 5 years ago. We need to be more nimble in the system of how to address change and what progressive ideas we can implement. I was talking to somebody recently who's just retired from the city of Toronto, and they said to me, you know, Greg, one of the problems in changing the system is it costs people their job to change the system, and people like their pensions, and they like their jobs, and they like their benefits. Good, I understand. So we have a very big boat that takes forever to shift. And by the time it shifts, all of a sudden demographics have changed or whatever has changed. We have to find ways to be nimble, to be faster, to solve problems. I mean, something I've always said is it would take 20 years to solve poverty, but we elect people for 4-year terms. I don't know what to do about that. Tell your statistics to shut up. I had 3 executive directors of Employment Ontario agencies, all good executive directors, tell me, Greg, don't send me your clients. Why? The reason is very simple. They're judged on success. I would be sending people, everyone would have a criminal record, most would have addictions, many would have mental health, many would have low literacy rates. These are not people that are easy to find jobs for. So hence, these 3 employment agencies didn't want our clients. Now, they would actually take them sometimes. They just wouldn't put them in their computer system because that affected their funding. Look, I'm an executive director. I understand funding. But what is, and I don't blame the government at all for wanting to determine the results of what they're doing. That's fair. The taxpayer deserves that. But what's happening is we're creaming. We're creaming off the top to make sure we're making those numbers. And I'll give you an example. Something you may have heard about, and if you haven't, you're sure going to, is social impact bonds. These were going to be the big solution. This was like the boat had just landed. Well, the problem with them, and here's how they work, is at John Howard, we believe if we could have transitional housing instead of putting guys into prison, so at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, we could put them into transitional housing with supports, we could lower recidivism, and we'd have a safe place to keep them where we could monitor their conditions until we found them housing. That would cost about $3 million to purchase and renovate. So we would go to, let's call it the Royal Bank of Canada, and say, or Walmart or whoever, to a business, and say, if you give us the $3 million, we will lower recidivism by 20% for the people who go through this program. The federal government would guarantee that loan. If we met our 20% cut, then the federal government would pay the Royal Bank or Walmart or whoever back the $3 million plus interest. Well, this sounds like, wow, we finally found a funding formula that works in that it involves the private sector, it increases the federal government's involvement, and John Howard gets new social facilities and so forth. Well, the problem with it is Royal Bank's going to want the $3 million back. So they're going to lean on me big time to make sure I have that 20% cut that I promised, which means I'm going to be taking guys who are easier to help rather than hard to help. And something I've always been proud of at John Howard is we've creamed off the bottom, not the top. So, and you know, there's a lot of research now, you can Google it, the problems they've had in England and in the States with social impact bonds. Okay, so there is an election coming. These are questions that we would encourage you to ask your candidates. Would your party support ratification of the 2002 UN protocol to the Convention Against Torture? You think torture is a bad idea. Would your party limit the duration of solitary confinement and administrative seg of prisoners and ban its use for prisoners who are mentally ill? Would your party support correctional reforms that will reduce crowding, curb violence, ensure access to medical services, and respect the human rights of prisoners? Sort of motherhood, isn't it? Would your party adopt a drug strategy that included harm reduction, prevention, and treatment for the illness of an addiction? Would your party encourage effective non-criminal justice responses or community-based sentences for mentally ill, brain damaged, cognitively impaired, or addicted individuals? Would your party allow for judicial discretion to impose a proportionate sentence if a mandatory sentence or fine would be disproportionately harsh given the facts of the particular case? Would your party support prison reform that included rehabilitation programs, educational opportunities, labor market training and certifications, and through the prison gate reintegration support? And would your party reform the record suspension pardon system to make it efficient, economical, and fair? Right now, the record suspension program, it used to be called a pardon. And you qualify for it 5 years after you're done your sentence. And that's every part of your sentence, your parole, your fine, whatever. And the problem with it is it's those 5 years where we've got to get Johnny working. If that's when Johnny's criminal record is causing him the most problem. And I'll tell you a true story. I had a guy, because we help people with the record suspensions. I think we help about 500, 600 guys a year, or men and women, a year to get the record suspension. But I had one guy, we fill out his application, pay the $631, get the fingerprints, get all his court transcripts, send it in, comes back, well, no, he owes $1. $1, because some judge put $1 fine 7 years ago that he'd forgotten about, we had no record of. And so if he paid the $1 and waited 5 more years, he could apply for his record suspension. You can't make this stuff up. And the problem is you're arguing with the computer. So we actually said to the guy, look, you got 2 choices. Go to your MP or go to the Toronto Star. He went to Carolyn Bennett, the MP for St. Paul's was his MP, and she got it changed. I mean, it was $1, but that's the system. Okay, so let's make the world a better place. I've talked long enough. I'd certainly answer any questions, but I'm not an expert. I have opinions. I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts and opinions and so forth, and thank you very much.
Okay, so anyone who has any questions for Greg Rogers, raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
Greg, you were talking about the number of people who don't have high school education. Can you elaborate more on what's doing to help gain people more education? And are the local school boards involved in that in Toronto?
Here's what I know. There used to be a program when you were in remand here in Toronto that actually paid for, it was $40 a course to take your GED, and depending on how many GED courses you needed. And this, you could actually apply and get the $40. Well, they cut that. So I actually had people at one of the prisons here in Toronto come to me and say, Greg, this is a great program. We got to keep, these guys are doing nothing anyhow. Let's get them their GEDs. So we went to a number of foundations here in Toronto. We raised about $10,000, $15,000. And we were actually subsidizing the provincial government to do this. And it's a great program. The Toronto Educational Board of Education is involved. One of the problems, though, is they're not allowed computers in the remand center. So, first of all, that sort of limits any computer programming, but it also limits some of the GED courses. These are problems inherent in the system. Is that helpful at all?
I have a question again, building on the high school backgrounds. Beginning in 2003, the Ontario government set up the Success to 18 Student Success Program, where in part of that, it was designed to support modified learning outcomes to achieve a high school diploma, which means that, this is my opinion, that the students that are graduating from high school with a diploma are maybe different in skill level than ones that because they have modified learning outcomes. Have you seen, are there any statistics on the rate of students that are high school grads in the system? That is, whether that's changed?
No, I can't comment on that. I'd be fascinated to know myself. It's not something I've seen a statistic on. I could give you a card after. One of my colleagues, Amber Kellen, may have access to that information.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Greg. In light of the political turn at the end and the list of questions to ask candidates, I just wanted to ask you, what strategies do you see as being more or less successful in changing, in getting the attention of politicians, but changing the overall tone of the dialogue around crime? Because, you know, we've all seen this kind of evidence before. It gets produced and produced and produced, and yet you still hear, you know, a Rob Ford come out and say, "I'm not into hugging thugs." End of story. Good quote. Changes everybody back to the, you know, treating crime as a four-letter word, as you said. So what strategies have you seen be effective in really getting people's attention and saying, look, this is worth looking at, even if it would be unpopular with the public or go against the perceptions that have been created over the last, whatever, 3 decades?
Evidence-based does work. The bureaucrats know. In fact, you know, I've been very fortunate to have met ministers of provincial corrections, the deputy ministers and so forth. They know this stuff far better than me. They know what works. It's political. And I think there's been a number of changes. The correctional system is an awfully difficult thing to change. First of all, the public doesn't care. They don't. Second of all, the union OPSU is very, very strong. And, you know, I'm a big supporter of the correctional officers. They have a dangerous job. They work hard. And they work in an awful, you know, I wouldn't want to work there every day. But they're very reluctant to change. So implementing something, the Toronto South tried a bunch of new strategies. I don't know if anybody in here ever had a tour of it. They got this beautiful medical facility that's still closed. A number of innovative things they tried to do there, and it's just been the whole way. So, you know, change is slow, change is coming. Change usually, actually, frankly, is a result of somebody has to die. Then there's an inquest, then it's all over the media, then they have to solve it. You know, that's sad but true, I think.
Hi, Greg. I know that in the United States, one of the critiques of the remand system is that it often leads people who actually are not guilty of a crime into accepting a plea bargain to be guilty of a lesser charge, and they have to go to jail. Is that the same circumstance here in Ontario or in Toronto because of the overcrowding?
Of course it happens, but I wouldn't have a figure for you on percentages of when it happens. But I mean, just it's human nature. Okay, look, you can get out by pleading guilty today, or you can serve 2 months or wait 2 months for your trial in here. Look, many people would just say, look, I'll just plead. You know?
Hi. Just had a quick question regarding the rehab programs. How much or how many of the programs target mental health? Because we think there are large links to mental health here, and since the deinstitutionalization a while now, that seemed to have been the place which had its own challenges where support for mental health problems could be attained. So now we're seeing here that they become dumped in the criminal justice system, and if they don't have a link to a drug addiction, they don't qualify for rehabilitation homes, right? So how many of the programs that are offered kind of help with the mental health aspect?
I don't know what percentage of programs, certainly a lot more than 10 years ago. Having said that, they did close the treatment center in Kingston.
Right.
So I don't know that it's improved particularly in the federal system, even though they're catching royal heck for it in the media, and eventually they will have to do something. Provincially, they've implemented a number of changes. Certainly the Toronto South has more social workers. It used to be the East and the West had 2 social workers, 600 clients and 2 social workers. Think about that. That's actually one of the reasons we opened the Reintegration Center. CAMH is getting, I believe it's a few million a year to eventually work with 20 high mental illness cases in the Toronto South. I think that has started. I don't think it's matured yet. Oh, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Okay.
No, just, yeah.
But you know, I know that some sort of agreement is in place for that. Certainly, they have mental health diversion. CMHA is doing it. That's a good program, and that didn't exist 5-6 years ago. So there have been improvements, but ironically, it's also caused more people to be identified with mental health issues that before were not ending up in the criminal justice system. So. Anyhow, I hope I haven't been depressing, because I'm not. I've seen a lot of big improvements, and there's a lot of good people working in the criminal justice system. It's a huge topic. I mean, every one of these we could have drilled down on. Some of them I just skimmed over. It just, I was getting hoarse, and it was also, I was looking at some yawns. But I thank you very much, and I thank you for your interest, because the problem is a lot of people just don't care. And we have to care. These are our families. These are our communities, and they're coming back out and rejoining our communities. And I really say, you know, I beseech anybody who's in the research business in this room, there's lots of research to be done. There's a lot of problems been identified. There's a lot of solutions starting to emerge. I think one of the things we've got to look at now is implementation of solutions. How do we implement stuff? And I hope that many of you are involved in that. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Liberal Arts and Science Conference Committee, we have a little token of appreciation for Greg.
Thank you very
And
much.
you gave us a lot to think about, so thank you very much for your talk, and hopefully we'll go forward with making the world a better place.
I'm sure you will. Have a great conference.
Yeah, so right now we're going to have a reception in the Humber room. I think the website said here, but it's not. It's Humber room. Okay, so feel free to come there. And remember, Jeff mentioned drink tickets. Yeah, so make sure you get the drink tickets. And hopefully see most of you there. And tomorrow at the conference and the sessions. Thank you.